Right after the election in November 2020, lawyer Sidney Powell famously said that she was going to release the Kraken. Just last week, Sidney Powell pled guilty in the Georgia election interference case. But there's one shocking detail about the plea deal, and I mean shocking, that no one in the mainstream media is telling you about. We're going to talk about it here, this week, on Wolves in Finance. YouTube's policy is that they do not allow content challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election. To stay within this policy, I will be focusing specifically on analysis of Donald Trump's trial in Georgia. The issue in that trial is not whether Joe Biden did or did not win the election. It is whether Donald Trump believed that there was fraud in the election. The prosecution is claiming that Donald Trump secretly believed that Joe Biden won, and then lied about it in order to overturn the election. Let us start by explaining the background. Back in November 2020, the election had just been called for Joe Biden by all the major news networks. President Trump refused to concede the election and claimed that there was widespread fraud. Georgia was one of the states in question. The vote was tallied with a very narrow margin, and the state performed a recount. So the original vote took place on November 3rd, but the winner was not officially announced until after the recount on November 19th. One of the people leading the fight in Georgia was a lawyer from Texas named Sidney Powell. Amidst all the chaos, on November 13th, Sidney Powell went on Fox Business News in an interview with Lou Dobbs. In the interview, she explained that she believed there was evidence of election fraud. She finished the interview by stating that she was going to release the Kraken. This interview went viral on Twitter. Now, Sidney Powell receives a lot of criticism for being an election denier, but keep in mind, when she said this, Joe Biden had not even won yet. The interview happened a week before Georgia announced Joe Biden was the winner. But it does not seem like Sidney Powell ever got her chance to release the Kraken. Every time she attempted to bring a lawsuit to challenge the election results, the judge would not hear the case. The same thing happened in Georgia. Sidney Powell filed a lawsuit in federal court to decertify the election results. The judge threw out the case because he said they needed to file in state court, and he did not have the power to order the state to decertify the federal election. This is important. He did not throw out the case because of the evidence. He threw it out over a technicality. He never even looked at the evidence. Sidney Powell did not agree with the judge's decision because it seems like a federal election should be adjudicated in a federal court. She appealed the decision all the way to the Supreme Court, who refused to hear the case before Joe Biden took office. Sidney Powell dropped the lawsuit on January 19th, 2021, one day before Joe Biden's inauguration. So we have never had the opportunity to hear the evidence of election fraud in the Georgia case. Fast forward to August 2023. Georgia Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis brought an indictment with 41 criminal charges for election interference against 19 defendants, including President Trump. As I said before, Trump's state of mind is the critical issue in this case. The prosecution has to prove intent to engage in wrongdoing. That means that Donald Trump had to secretly believe that Joe Biden won, and then he pushed claims of voter fraud that he knew were not true. Trump has pled not guilty in the case. Now, let me clarify a few things that a lot of people do not understand. Fani Willis is not the Georgia State Attorney General. She's only the district attorney of one county in Georgia called Fulton County. This is the county that contains the city of Atlanta, which is heavily Democrat. Isn't that odd? If there was, in fact, a criminal conspiracy to overturn Georgia election results, shouldn't it be brought by the state attorney general? Why has no other county in Georgia signed onto this case? The only county is Fulton County, which is heavily Democrat. That is odd. So in this criminal case, Fani Willis is saying that her mostly Democrat voters were so disenfranchised by Donald Trump's actions that she is asking the court to put Trump in Georgia state prison for 20 years. But wait a minute. Joe Biden was announced as the winner of the election. He's a Democrat. How can these Democrat voters be victims of a crime when they won? This makes absolutely no sense. Without going into any of the other details of the case, for this reason, I believe the case should be thrown out entirely. It's a little ridiculous. How can Trump be guilty of election interference when the Democrats were announced as the winners? Under this same rationale, what is to stop a district attorney from a Republican county charging Fani Willis for criminal conspiracy against Trump? When you realize that this is a small county dispute, you start to realize how silly this case is. Who else is involved in this case? The judge is someone named Scott McAfee. He is very young for a judge, 34 years old. So again, let's take a step back and just evaluate what is going on here. This 34-year-old is a Fulton County judge and is deciding the fate of the front runner for the next president of the United States. Not only that, this judge used to work under Fani Willis in the county district attorney's office. So Fani Willis is arguing her case in front of her former employee. Shouldn't that disqualify him from being a judge? How can he be impartial? This case has been in all of the headlines lately because last week, Sidney Powell pled guilty to 6 of the charges in the case. She's agreeing to 6 years of probation, a $6,000 fine, and an additional $2,700 restitution payment to the state. She also agreed to testify at the upcoming trial against Trump, and also agreed to not have any communication with any of the defendants or the media until the case is over. Now, I started this video by saying that there is something shocking about this plea agreement. Take a look at this. This is the plea agreement from Sidney Powell. It mentions she is admitting guilt for conspiracy to commit theft by taking and 5 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties. These are misdemeanors. It's similar to her pleading guilty to a traffic ticket. But if you look at her plea deal, you will notice that something is missing. There is no guilty plea for racketeering under the RICO statute. Now let us look at the legal documents that were filed by Fani Willis at the start of this case. Here's the official legal complaint. This is a 95-page document detailing all the steps taken by the 19 individuals to allegedly overturn the election. You can see that there is a long list of criminal charges, but the first charge is racketeering. This one charge is the bulk of the case. Of the 98 pages in the document, pages 20 to 71 are about the racketeering charge. Racketeering is the whole point of the case, because without racketeering, there is no way to tie all these different people together. The argument is that Trump was the head of a criminal organization and pulling the strings of all the moving pieces in order to commit a crime. In my opinion, this has always been one of the weakest cases currently going on against Trump. RICO charges are meant to be used to prosecute gang violence, drug crimes, and murder. It's not meant to be used against people who are protesting an election. There are so many Democrats who have also protested the election. For some reason, Fani Willis is not prosecuting any of the Democrats, which makes the whole case seem politically motivated. Just to give you an example of how much this case stretches the law, here is one section that reads, David James Schaefer reserved room 216 at the Georgia State Capitol in Fulton County, Georgia, for the December 14, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. This was an overt act in the furtherance of the conspiracy. Just so that you understand what this means, this man booked a conference room. This document is claiming that booking a conference room is a crime. This man is a felon and should go to prison. Now, I'm sorry, but I think that most people can acknowledge that this is a stretch of the law. You should not be using the same law you use against drug dealers to go after people who book conference rooms. If that is the case, prosecutors could charge anyone for anything. Apparently, you don't even have to be in the same county and they can come after you. So back to Sidney Powell's plea deal. What is so shocking is that what she's pleading guilty to is not related to the charges against Donald Trump. The plea deal should have said that she pleads guilty to racketeering. But instead, the misdemeanor charges appear to be related to the scandal that happened in Coffee County. So what happened in Coffee County? Coffee County is a small, mostly Republican county. The day after the January 6 protests at the Capitol, election officials let an IT repairman access the voting machines and create copies of the hard drives. This was after the election. No votes were affected. They just copied the files to maintain evidence of what happened. But this was done without following proper procedures. It was all caught on video, so there's really not any dispute over what happened. There's also a check for $26,000 from Sidney Powell paying the repairman for his work for the day. It's pretty clear from this evidence that this was wrong. Any voting-related equipment is required to remain secure at all times. No one should have access without authorization. What Sidney Powell should have done in this situation was receive a court order to inspect the voting machines and then hire the repairman. She did not go through the proper steps. So it appears what Sidney Powell pled guilty to was the very specific incident in Coffee County. In fact, other people involved in the case have also pled guilty, and it appears that their pleas were also related to the Coffee County incident. Do you see what's going on here? These plea deals have nothing to do with the case against Trump. Trump had nothing to do with Coffee County. Fani Willis is taking this isolated incident and stretching it to say that Trump was somehow involved through racketeering. That's a pretty massive disconnect. And yet, no one is reporting this in the mainstream media. Don't you think it's pretty important that none of the guilty pleas relate to the allegations against Trump? Why doesn't any of the news coverage mention this? What is the most bizarre is why are the Democrats in Fulton County prosecuting people for something that happened in Coffee County? It's not even their county. Shouldn't Coffee County be prosecuting this issue? Now let's look at the situation from Sidney Powell's perspective. Under her plea agreement, she gets off with a misdemeanor, which is like a traffic ticket. She gets no felonies. And she does not have to pay the $1 million it would cost her to go through a trial. Not only that, she was prosecuted under the Georgia First Offender Act. She has no previous criminal record, which means that if she complies with the terms of her sentence, she will show no conviction on her criminal record. Not only that, if she is pleading guilty to the Coffee County incident, she does not have to admit to anything related to Trump because the racketeering charges are not involved. You need to remember that there are two parties in a plea deal. Sidney Powell is agreeing to something, but the prosecution is also agreeing to something. The prosecution is admitting that Sidney Powell had nothing to do with any racketeering crime. They can never prosecute her for that. In fact, the prosecution has made the same agreement with the other people who have pled guilty. The prosecution is admitting that there was no racketeering crime related to any of these people. It seems to me that Sidney Powell negotiated for herself one of the best plea agreements I have ever seen. Not only did she get off almost scot-free, she has single-handedly torpedoed the prosecution's case against Donald Trump. Think about it. The prosecution has now publicly admitted that Sidney Powell, the main lawyer in the center of all these election lawsuits, had nothing to do with racketeering. How in the world are they going to convict Trump of racketeering when they admitted that Sidney Powell did not commit racketeering? Are they going to say that Sidney Powell was a part of it and they just let her walk free? Are they going to say that she wasn't involved and that Trump somehow did it without Sidney Powell? That makes no sense. Trump can just say that he was not involved with what these people pled guilty to and that none of them mentioned in their plea agreement that he was. What it seems like to me is that Fani Willis is just doing this to smear Donald Trump in the press. I think she made a huge mistake. She had Sidney Powell, who is in the center of everything, and she lets her walk in a nothing plea deal. Why? I'll tell you what I think. Fani Willis was so desperate to get the headline that Sidney Powell pled guilty that she agreed to a sweetheart deal. She is sinking her own case for the headline. She put Sidney Powell under a gag order so she could not talk to the press. So the only voice we are hearing is the prosecution's. That's why no one realizes what's happening. Now, don't misunderstand me. Fani Willis can still win this case initially. Just like we have seen in the New York trials, we have a politically motivated prosecutor with a biased judge and a jury that will mostly be Democrats. But here's what can happen. As this judge and prosecutor take more and more ridiculous actions, it becomes more likely that Trump can get the entire case thrown out on appeal. I don't think that Fani cares about winning the case at this point. She just wants as many headlines as she can get. It seems to me that Fani Willis is using her power as a government prosecutor to frivolously attack a politician she doesn't agree with. That's wrong. It's abuse of power, malicious prosecution, and election interference. Fani Willis should actually be prosecuting herself. So let us get back to the Kraken. What is the Kraken? When Sidney Powell went on TV in 2020 and said that she was going to release the Kraken, she was saying that when the case goes to trial, they were going to present evidence that was so shocking that it would show clear corruption in the 2020 election in Georgia. But like I said earlier, the judge never allowed them to present their evidence. We have never seen the Kraken. But keep this in mind. From what we have heard, it is going to be more shocking than the evidence we already know about. So what have we already seen? There is video evidence of poll workers in Fulton County, the same county as Fani Willis, cheating in the 2020 election. Just to recap, someone reported a water pipe burst and sent the poll watchers home. After the poll watchers left, election workers pulled hidden suitcases out from under a draped table and jammed the ballots through the machines multiple times. Now, the FBI looked into the incident and claims that they did nothing wrong. But we can see it in the video. Someone please explain to me what the FBI is doing, because they seem worthless to me. What do you mean they did nothing wrong? We can see it. Then, researchers have found that people falsified the tally sheets used to count the ballots. Poll workers wrote one amount for the number of votes for Biden and no votes for Trump. An audit of the actual ballots showed that this was false. This also happened in Fulton County. Then we've also found duplicate ballots. The evidence is blatantly obvious because here is one example of a handwritten ballot for Kanye West. This was scanned into the voting machines twice. Now, the Secretary of State disputes all these claims and says that the duplicate ballots were caught and not counted. But the Secretary of State is losing credibility because all these problems happened under his watch. Guess where these duplicate ballots occurred? Fulton County. Maybe Fani Willis should prosecute voter fraud in her own county before charging President Trump. Now, just to repeat for the sake of YouTube policy, the official narrative is that these examples did not impact the final election results. Please do not delete my video, YouTube. My point is not to argue who won the election. Even if you believe there was no election fraud, Fani Willis still should not have brought this case. How in the world is she going to prove that Donald Trump secretly believed that Joe Biden won? I don't think anyone believes that. I just showed you some evidence that we already know about, and Trump's report apparently contains evidence that is even more shocking. Hours after Donald Trump was indicted by Fani Willis, he posted on Truth Social this message. A large, complex, detailed, but irrefutable report on the presidential election fraud which took place in Georgia is almost complete and will be presented by me at a major news conference at 11 a.m. on Monday of next week in Bedminster, New Jersey. Shortly after this tweet, Trump changed his mind about the press conference and posted, rather than releasing the report on the rigged and stolen Georgia 2020 presidential election on Monday, my lawyers would prefer putting this, I believe, irrefutable and overwhelming evidence of election fraud and irregularities in formal legal filings as we fight to dismiss this disgraceful indictment. So the press conference never happened, and the report was never released. But Donald Trump claims that he has in his possession significant evidence about fraud in the 2020 election. This is the Kraken. Trump is holding it and is planning on releasing it during the trial when the maximum number of people will be watching. In his words, it will completely vindicate him from the allegations in the trial. This is the biggest mistake Fani Willis has made. The thing with trials is that unlike in the media and on YouTube, both sides get a chance to present their evidence. Fani Willis is providing Trump a platform that he was denied in his previous cases. He will get the chance to produce the evidence of cheating in the 2020 election with the whole world watching. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think that Trump should release the Kraken? Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. I have some more unsettling news because my video last week got demonetized again. This keeps happening to me, and it's frustrating because I know that mainstream channels like MSNBC and CNN are covering the same news stories, probably not as accurately, and they don't get demonetized. But you guys know my approach. I'm going to keep coming on here and bringing you the facts. I'm just relying more on memberships from viewers like you. If you want to support the channel, the best way is to sign up for a membership on my website, wolvesandfinance.com. For $6 a month, your support helps me survive when my videos get demonetized and shadow banned. Thank you to all the new members lately. I really appreciate your support. I'm Zach from Wolves and Finance. Thank you for watching.